Welcome to the second season of the Storylux Marketing Podcast. In this season, we explore how marketers use AI to get better results for less money. Let's face it, since the release of ChatGPT, marketing AI tools have become a dime a dozen, and the real challenge is not finding a tool that does what you want, but having clarity of the process and then taking that process and simplifying it with AI. So over the next weeks, we will release 12 interviews, each detailing one marketing process that has been simplified thanks to AI. In this first episode, JohnScott Dixon shows us how he took the pain out of buyer persona development. Writing buyer personas, and I speak from experience, is one of the most dreaded tasks in marketing. And that's mostly because it's a pain to get hold of interview subjects, but also because reading the interview transcripts is time-consuming and identifying key points tedious work. So instead, many marketers, and I plead guilty on this account as well, fabricate buyer personas by relying on their gut, a bit of hearsay, maybe an interview with a previous client, but it's not really scientifically done. That is a bad choice because the buyer personas that come out of this gut-based process are usually stale, one-dimensional, a bit of hypothesis, and of little value to the copywriter. So JohnScott has developed a better process with AI. So this session, we are going to focus on three things. One is how to identify your ideal clients without actually speaking to them, magic. Then the second thing is identifying personality types without having to actually do personality type tests, also magic. And the third thing is bringing all of this information together in a one-pager that is crisp and immediately actual for the copywriter and the development team. So with this process, JohnScott cut the production time and cost in half, and instead of waiting a month to launch a new campaign, his team can get started within a week developing a new website or doing other things in marketing. JohnScott Dixon has worked as a senior vice president in various Fortune 500 companies before starting his own agency, Aiden Taylor Marketing, in 2004. Since then, he's helped hundreds of business owners grow their bottom line with buyer personas that work. And now, let's learn from JohnScott what he has to show. Hey, welcome, JohnScott, to the next episode of the new season of the Storylux podcast, How I Use AI for Marketing. And JohnScott is a very interesting guy. We had a long chat about his process. So let's just kick off and talk a little bit of your background so people understand where you're coming from and what your expertise is, so they understand how this whole thing with building a very effective persona comes together. So you were a SVP in a Fortune 500 company, and during that time you saw a lot around building good personas. Tell us about your background in that regard.
Yeah, so just like any marketer that goes to school and jumps out, gets a job and starts working for a company, you understand that there are certain things you need to do strategically. And part of that is understanding the customer segments. And a representative of a customer segment is a persona, right? It's a way to personify that segment so we really can get our hands around who that person is and really start to think about them and humanize the way we're going to deal with it. So we'd spend a ton of time in these, in larger organizations, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and we'd create these beautiful personas, really well thought out. It would take a long time to do it, a lot of work. And the experience was we did all the work and then what? It just kind of sat there and collected dust. And when I left corporate America and the larger corporations and jumped into running my own agency, working with smaller businesses between 5 million and 300 million, there's more focus on getting ROI out of the work. So, I mean, it's there in the larger organization. You have a little bit more, there's a little less pressure on you to show how that ROI got produced. In the smaller organization, there's a lot of pressure on it. Why are we doing this persona work? How's it going to move us forward in terms of making money?
Interesting.
Right. So that's the pressure I felt and wanted to change things. And we've done that. And I can probably share some things that illustrate it.
So with the personas you build, I mean, you don't just build them for fun, but they're part of a bigger process that we just gonna touch on lightly here. But I think would be good to see the bigger picture. Tell us more about that.
Well, so you probably want me to share it, right?
I want to see everything.
Okay. All right. Let's jump in now. This is going to be a bit of an eye chart. This is what we're trying to get to. This is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. When you build a persona, then you have to build the journey map. And the way we do journey maps that produce ROI is we build down here at the bottom. And I know it's hard to read. It's not even worth reading. It's worth reading, but for the purposes of this session, what we want to pay attention to are we want to create the message objective. How are we going to talk to this persona at each stage? What are the key points that we can use to support our message objective? And what's an example of the voicing? How do we write it so that they'll absorb it better, thinking about this particular persona? So that's probably all we need to say here, but this is the stuff that allows copywriters, when they're writing ads, when they're writing sales collateral, email campaigns, web pages, all of that stuff, they first ask, hey, what is this piece for? Which persona? And at what stage of the journey are they? And then they come to this map and figure out, here's the message objective for that stage for that persona. And here are the key points, and here's the potential copy.
Yeah.
Many times our clients will print this out and put it on a wall in their conference room so they can go back and reference it.
That's so fascinating, because I see so many companies doing two things. One is they say, well, we need a persona. Let's do some persona work. And we're going to talk about this in a minute. And then they come up with sort of very generic descriptions, or like they copy paste something from the internet and then they fill it in as they see fit or what they think people write. So I don't think it's very actionable. And then the second step that we are seeing here is like, how does it fit into a bigger picture of what do we communicate in what channel, at what point, to what person? I think like the second step gets skipped most of the time. And I think it's phenomenal what you're doing here. So I'm just very impressed with what I'm seeing here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's taken years to kind of get to that part of it. But it's really effective for our clients. And we've done hundreds of these. This is the part that we're trying to get to. And this is where the power exists. But to get there, we got to build personas.
Actionable personas.
Yeah. And, kind of the reason we're talking today is to get to the actionable persona, there are some components of building that are just challenging and take a ton of...
So we want to talk about the process now. And we love processes. They make things predictable. Team members see what's happening and you can plan ahead. So let's talk about the process that you used to run before ChatGPT came around, and then the process that you're now using, and what are the benefits in terms of like time saved and like maybe being more accurate. Let's look at that.
Yeah, so this is part of really ugly, and I apologize, persona. This is meant to be an internal communication, and people allow me to kind of go fast in some ways, so I didn't spend a lot of time trying to clean this up.
That's
I should have. There are two tracks that you're looking at here, the A and the B. The B represents kind of the existing process that we used pre-AI.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's old, but we're still going to use it because there are important points of it, and I'll point that out as we kind of move through it, and we'll do it quickly. And then the new one is post AI, what we're doing with the current version of ChatGPT 4. If we look at the old one to contrast it first, in both instances, we have to ID with the client, who are your personas? And they may approach the world with a kind of on average, this is our customer. And they'll talk about the average age, the average income, that kind of stuff. And we get in there and we say, well, let's split it into smaller bite-sized chunks of people that are definitely more like each other over here and more like each other over there. And it could be something as simple as a B2B persona and a B2C persona. right? So we'll separate that out. And because the next step is to either get from the client, the old way was to get the contacts. Who are the people that, now that we understand we're going to do a B2B and a B2C, can you tell us who we might interview that is representative of the B2B segment? And they'll immediately say, well, they'll name off some people and give them to us, and we can say, great. And now we enter this area, this fuzzy area where I've got a big question mark, the place where ROI gets lost and where nothing happens and momentum gets lost. It's horrible space. It is defined by having to set appointments with people who aren't the client.
You're probably not very interested in talking to you, so they're not very responsive. You have to beg them to come back to you.
Yeah, sometimes we'll have clients pay them, but it's hard. So now we're trying to get an appointment set with a third party. And then if we get the appointment set, do they actually show up? So we usually have to reschedule, and that sometimes can go multiple cycles. Once we get them, it's a 45-minute to an hour and a half interview that they sit through. And usually once we get them there, they're happy to do it, and they'll talk. Some of them talk a lot, some of them talk very little, but it's generally in that time frame. So that is a scary part that was the part I was asked to solve with AI. So my organization came to me and said, hey, we're really getting killed here in this space. John, can you create a new process that'll help us out? And that's kind of my role within the organization. So I did. But before I jumped to that process, once we got that done, we would get the transcriptions from the work and actually spend time with it. We've got video, we've got audio if we need to do it that way. We've got the written transcripts, and a writer spends time synthesizing that into a persona. So it's a lot of work. It's difficult work, and that happens the following couple of weeks. So when you look at this, it would be about a month to do the old process, and plus whatever this is, which usually ends up being a month by itself.
So to summarize it, one thing is to get the data from your client, who to speak to, then arranging interviews, waiting for people to get back, do the interviews, get the transcription, analyze the stuff. So that's the old process. And the main pain point is that you don't have any influence over when people get back to you, when they're available, when you can do the interview. So there's a lot of waiting that you can shortcut. So
There are all sorts of frustration and lost. We have people ready to do the interview. They don't show up. So we're paying for this stuff all along the way, and then having to
it's painful for the team. Team members are super frustrated and stuff like
for everybody.
Not accounted for.
It's painful for everybody. But it's, as you saw the outcome when I showed you the journey map, it's essential to get there. We're stuck with this thing. If we're going to do it right, if we want to not do it right, fine. So, and we should say, a lot of people show up to an agency and they'll say, hey, can you build me a new website? And if you don't care about the strategy part, you can say, sure. What do you want? And they'll say, we want it to be more blue and a little bit simpler and more modern. Okay, whatever that means. And you can build a website. It would be the wrong way to generally approach it, because you should start with thinking about who are you trying to talk to? Who do you anticipate showing up to that website? That's the persona. And then marching through all of the work that I've described. So let's move into the new process, should we?
Exactly. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so you still have to ID. You still have to go through it's usually a couple hours with the client to figure out, hey, who are the personas? Who are the reasonable personas that we should go build? And for each one of those, we're going to need to do an interview with the client. Now, once they have it, if you talk to them at the outset and they just have the average, here's our customer. If they're thinking that way, it's very difficult for them to get in the mindset that we need to have them in to get an effective proxy interview. But once they understand and can say, yeah, I've got this segment A, segment B, segment C, and they know who the customers are that are in segment A, and you ask them to think about a representative customer like one of those people or a melding of those people, you find out that they can get their heads in that space and speak very effectively. They can talk about, hey, here's how they would search for it. Here's what they ask, here are the questions they ask. They know all of that stuff. So they're a reasonable proxy to create a facsimile of who that persona would be. It may not be as accurate as if you're talking to real customers, but it's going to be pretty darn close. Close enough that you can do when we talked about that overarching work, trying to get a website that looks, as an example, that's going to appeal more to that persona. It's a heck of a lot better than not doing any of this work at all.
No matter what you do, it's going to be miles ahead of the alternative.
Okay, so that's work. 100%. So now we're at this work on stage 2, and I know nobody can read what I've got written here. I wrote ID, client interview. The next stage is the transcription. So we've done the client interview almost at the same time today with Zoom and Green and all sorts of AI-driven listening and note-taking devices. We get a great transcript right after the call, within minutes, right? So now it's when we feed that into AI. In this case, we're going to use ChatGPT 4, but we're going to feed that transcription into it so it can get in its head what we're talking about and really start to help to build the persona. And then finally, we're going to turn this back to a human and let them do the editing process, right? We're going to get them off the blank page. We're going to give them a really decent persona and then let them finalize.
And it's so much easier to elaborate on something that has already existed. You can see the weak points and work on that.
100%. Any writer knows this. Yeah. So you see I put 2 weeks because the old process, just to ID and get the contacts, took about 2 weeks. We can probably do the whole thing in 10 days, maybe a week. Depends on how gung-ho the client is to do the interview with them. It can go very quickly. And so that's obviously as an agency owner, music to my ears. As the client, music to their ears, because nobody really wants to spend time doing this persona work. While we're doing that, no needles being moved, right? When we get it done, we can start building campaigns, building websites, doing the kind of stuff that's going to generate income. Okay, so I think we covered that. Should we jump into how it works?
Let's look at the process in detail. Let's look at the prompts.
Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is the transcription, and that's big enough you can see it okay, right?
Yeah.
What I'm showing you is the raw transcription that's being added into ChatGPT 4. And you can just kind of quickly read that. Turns out the person is in your city, Cape Town. Anyway, so we're moving through the interview, and let me scroll this up. I ended up having to do this 9 times for this interview because the interviews, like I said, take between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. And that's quite a bit of talking. So I had to add it in sections because ChatGPT would not take the entire thing at once. So I split it up into 9 parts. And for each part, I would ask it, you can see it at the very top. I said, please summarize this conversation. That's all I said. And then I gave it the conversation. And within seconds, it gave me a full, kind of analysis of that, a summary of what I said or what was done in the transcription.
Yeah, nice 5-paragraph summary of the whole conversation.
Yeah. So it grabs the summary. And so I do this in repeated steps until I've finished that part and I've got all of the transcription embedded in the session, or ingested, I should say. Okay. Once I've done that, I'm ready to have it do the work. So my first question was, using everything from above, so all of the transcriptions and the summaries, can you create a short description for the female shopper Nadia persona? And it generated a 5-paragraph short description of the persona. Right now, it has some things that were very specific to the way it was answered, and it wasn't generic, but it did a reasonable job of producing a decent short description. Fair enough?
Yeah. Let's move on.
So the next thing I did, and this is where it kind of got fun. I asked it to create a list of motivations. I mean, you can see I didn't I didn't do anything. I mean, I just quickly jumped into it, create a list of motivations, and it created 9 motivations. Now, these were very specific to the interview, like I said, and I wanted it to be more generic. So I used a word that I don't think exists, but it understood me anyway. I said, can you genericize the motivations so they aren't so specific to her, the person we interviewed? And it said, certainly. And it knocked out 9 of these in a generic fashion, right? Way more useful for building a persona. It's just really cool that it can quickly make that adjustment. And by the way, each one of these questions are being answered in seconds. You know, I mean, just here it is. There's no like fear of the blank page for ChatGPT. I mean, it really doesn't have any writer's block ever. It just, you ask it the question, there's the answer, right? So then I asked it to do the same for frustrations. Now you notice I didn't say genericize it. It just said it got it. And it even used my phrasing, here's some genericized frustrations. And it knocked them out. Now these are generic and ready to go. So I can actually cut and paste these into our format for personas, which I'll show you in a little bit.
That's so cool. The international shipping costs, I mean, definitely there's a thing in South Africa. If you order from abroad, it's like, hell, you don't want to pay for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that frustration with the frequency or timing of sales and discounts, which play into that, right? Because you're forced to look for the sale because that's what's going to make up, you're going to lose that with the shipping cost. Yeah. Yeah, so produce that. And then I said, so I made a little bit of a tactical error, and it was just because I was too quick to hit the return key. And I knew I needed to give it an example of, when we do personas, at the persona level, we like to provide a list of questions that you'd expect that persona to answer as they move through the customer journey. So it's kind of like a preemptive thought before we do the customer journey mapping. And it's actually, if you looked at that document I showed you, at the very top are the questions that they're probably answering as they go through. It comes from this work. That's what kicks off how we do the customer journey process. Okay. Do I need to show you that, or you got that in your head and you think that's...
I think it's fine.
So I show it examples from something else, some other, an example from the past. And that's all I gave it. And then it tried to interpret that, said, it looks like you're doing something else for this other company. And I said, oh, sorry, my apologies. Please use the journey stage question examples above to prepare questions for the female shopper Nadia persona that we're talking about here. And it didn't have any pause. It immediately said, oh, now I see what you're doing. And it knocked out these questions really quickly, so it basically built what I was asking to using the example I gave it from something else. It was able to interpret that, figure out what I wanted, and produce it literally in seconds.
Yeah. To be clear, so what we see here basically are the answers you would fill into the customer journey map based on the sample and what AI learned from Nadia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this piece of work right here is, as a human, is time consuming. You really have to have your head in deep to be able to figure out what questions would they ask along a B2C 17-stage customer journey process, right? It's a lot. It's hard. So it could consume potentially an hour or two of a really quality persona builder's time just doing this work. And it was done in seconds. Yeah, with very little training or anything. So then we got into stuff where I'm going to jump to the learning styles. I think that's probably most instructive. So yeah, so I said, hey, which of the 4 learning styles best aligns with the female shopper Nadia persona? And all I said is why, what if, or how.
These are the names of a methodology of learning styles.
Yeah. It's actually called format. It's called format. It comes out of Australia, and you can read it's numeral 4 MAT if you want to get deeper on that. You can go learn about this stuff. They have a ton of There's a ton of documentation on it. But the interesting thing here is that if I were training usually we train writers to build personas. They don't have any formal education in that, and they need to be taught what we're doing. And so if I said, hey, I also want you to add the learning style and try to predict the learning style for the persona, that's part of the job, they would need an entire education around what that is. And they'd probably need to spend a couple hours getting themselves up to speed on what it means. I didn't ask ChatGPT if it understood this or if it knew. I didn't even mention format. I just said why, what if, or how. And somehow it had enough in it to just say, oh, I know what he's talking about. Boom. And then write a reasonable answer about what it should be.
That is so fascinating. I mean, they cut out a whole copywriter's job that you now don't have to train anymore.
Yeah, you say that, but, there's a phrase I learned from, I wish I could remember who I learned it from because that person deserved the credit. But it's basically, if you aren't using, ChatGPT or AI, then you're an idiot. But if you're only using ChatGPT or AI, then you're a moron. And so we're trying to live somewhere in between that space, and so we're balancing it with the human, and you'll see why, because I've got I'll share with you what one of our copywriters had to say about the initial persona built by AI, and I think that's instructive to see because there are issues. It's not perfect. Yeah. But man, it's a great,
gives you a huge head start. And as you said, you don't have to train the copywriter on this Australian methodology. The system just knows it, and you just have to verify that it makes sense and that it's actionable for the customer journey map.
Yeah, 100%. So that is what got produced there. And then I asked it to make a list of touch points, websites, association, all sorts of stuff. And it did a pretty thorough job of creating a set of touch points or channels where we might expect to interact with this type of persona. Then I asked it to create a set of generalized demographics. Did a pretty good job of doing that work. I finally asked it for a single sentence to describe the purpose. Now this threw ChatGPT off a little bit. Because it wanted to tell me, it thought I was asking, why would I ever build a persona? And it tried to explain why we're doing this work together to me. And I thought, okay, great. So I tried a couple of ways, and then finally I said, let me put it another way. What is the person that presents like female shopper Nadia trying to accomplish? And then it got it. So it wrote a decent, sentence here about that. That's the kind of the initial thing we talk about in a persona is this sentence. Yeah. I did ask it to take a guess at her income in US dollars. That's where the company's based. And then I asked it around purchasing types. This is usually done on a B2B, but I threw it out. It did a pretty good job of understanding what I'm saying here. There's 6 basic purchasing types. It used 3 for a B2C, which is typical. They're the decider, the buyer, and the user. And then from there, I just started asking it some random questions and kind of got more for me, not so much for building persona. So we don't have to go through all of that. Would you like to see kind of the output?
Yes, I think the output is then the persona profile.
Yeah.
Everything that we've seen here basically feeds into this profile. I think a form that a lot of people are familiar with, like these beautifully designed documents. So walk us through this one.
Yeah. So this is literally, I just took our template and I added in as I had asked questions. So that last question we finally got to, this is that sentence that I was speaking about. It shows up the purpose. Remember where ChatGPT was really struggling with my prompts, and then finally it got it and nailed it. So I didn't add anything to this. I simply cut and paste. That was my goal, is just cut and paste it and give it up as a draft, because I remember that fifth stage is to have a human take a look at it and make adjustments. And I wanted it to be kind of raw, just what ChatGPT gave me, nothing with my brain in it. So remember, it said decider, buyer, and user. There are those items. Here's the demographics that it helped me prepare with the estimated income. At the very beginning, we asked it about the short description, and it gave me those 5 paragraphs. Here they are. We've got learning style and personality type, motivations and frustrations, the customer journey questions that we talked about, and the touch points. So there's the document.
Everything is coming together.
The thing's coming together, right? So now we're off the blank page. We've got a reasonable draft persona here. And this image probably deserves a little bit of conversation. And we used on that. Yeah, we didn't use, obviously ChatGPT doesn't do this stuff. I should probably put the word yet after that sentence. So I went to Midjourney. I don't know if you're familiar with Midjourney, but that's what I typically use for creating AI driven or built images. Okay. And I'll show you the prompt that I used. So I said, create a photo, a realistic image of a woman living in Cape Town, South Africa. She is of African descent. She is seeking to express her personal identity, cultural heritage, and spiritual beliefs through thoughtfully chosen, high-quality, modern, and meaningful Islamic jewelry, while maintaining an active, practical, and budget-conscious lifestyle. Make it ultra-realistic. Use cinematic lighting, headshot. Now, this part came directly from ChatGPT. Right, so I put...
Did you ask ChatGPT for a Midjourney prompt?
I did not. That would be interesting. I don't know that it would do well on that, but it might. I haven't tried that. The reason is that all of this stuff happened after September 21st or whatever, or September 2021. And ChatGPT would probably say, I don't know what Midjourney is. I don't know. It'd be interesting. It's a whole other experiment, Simon. But it's possible. What I do know is I gave it enough, that purpose statement. I gave it that statement, and then I just added some things like
when I found purpose statement and added some bits.
Yeah. So I told it what I wanted. Right, I wanted it to be a photo, not a drawing or something else, and I said photorealistic. Right. So and where this person would be in kind of her ethnic background. That I did. Then so that's part of my prompt. Then I thought, let's give it this information so it could really think through that. And then I reinforced that I want it to be not just photorealistic, but ultra realistic, and use cinematic lighting. And it produced this person, this picture of a person that's never existed on our planet. It also gave me alternatives of other people that have never been on our planet. Right? So,
and then you chose from one of these shots, which one you felt like was most appropriate for the Nadia persona that you...
Yeah, because this client produces jewelry. I didn't want any jewelry to be showing because it wouldn't be their jewelry. So I wanted it to be generic with, it's just representative of the persona and not have the client get fixated on, oh, that's not our jewelry.
Yeah.
So that's why it's, done that way.
Cool. So now you have the profile, you have an image matching the profile, you've captured everything together on a very nice document.
Yep.
We're
at stage 4. We're of the 5 step. We're at step 4, and we're ready to go to step 5. And so I told you I'd share with you what the writer had to say. And so this is an excerpt of our conversation where she said, hey, here's the updated persona. She gave me a new one, which I'll show you in a second. And I updated the bio section to align with the audience. So the writer has been involved with, she actually did the interview. In this case, not always the case, but
that is important to know. So she was aware of all the information that the customer gave. So basically,
She had fairly deep understanding of this customer. She had been involved in our kickoff meetings with the client. So she had taken copious notes in those, because usually she's not participating as much as she is just trying to extract information from those early calls and the kickoff. Then she was assigned to do the interview. So she went through that entire process. And so she had already been, and she's done dozens of these personas for us. So she's she's definitely skilled at creating these, and she knows what to look for. So she listens, I guess I should say, very intentionally. So I really want her feedback on it. And so she's telling me, look, she had to update the bio. She had to revise the description where it had references to other things that don't need to be in the persona. All right, it's not specific to people living in Cape Town. They can be anywhere in the world. She added some occasions and gifting, as we were told that she buys 50-50 for herself and others. So she added some things there. She added more channels. So she got into the head of the person, actually expanded on that. She removed some motivations and frustrations that didn't appear applicable to her. She updated the personality type description to pull from. I solve problems for the organization. I had introduced the persona process a long time ago. It's been adapted, and I forgot that we had moved to a slightly different combination of personality type and learning style together in what we're calling these the rational, artisan, guardian, and idealist. So she adjusted to that. Now remembering that, I would do it differently in the conversation with ChatGPT, and I would have avoided that issue. But that's my human error. She added brands, because that's a helpful component. I think ChatGPT could probably do that. I just didn't ask. And she did some general reformatting. That's just my bad. She's more anal about getting that stuff done properly. And then I think this is an important sentence. Overall, I think AI gave this one a big head start. And keep in mind, her head start here is about after she receives the transcript, what happens next. And that's the synthesis part, which is really hard. It could take her 6 hours, 8 hours to produce the initial draft of the persona. And we're cutting all that out, but she's not even thinking about the part that we cut out where we used just a proxy for the interview. And not having to schedule the appointments and all that kind of stuff, that got cut out too, right? So,
and there's another dimension to something you write, and you want to review that, rewrite that. You need to sort of have a break for a day or more to sort of like gain some distance, and then you can go back. And in this case, she basically already has this distance because she didn't write the initial draft. She just goes at the initial draft and can write it as if, she sees it for the first time.
Yeah, way easier as a writer to jump into that. Well, I'm a writer, you're a writer. I mean, it's easier to jump into something that's existing and refine it rather than start from the dreaded blank page. So, she tells us, hey, there were errors and inconsistencies from what the client told us. And we already knew about, or what we already knew and what the client had told us. And so, that stuff's coming from having conversations that I didn't put into ChatGPT. So she's recognizing that. And she's just flagging, so we're careful that when we build with AI, we're always cross-referencing with our kickoff docs. But I think the process should work. So that was a thumbs up for me from her. Hey, this was net good. And remember, her part is just the process after the transcription. The real net good for me is getting rid of that big question mark that I showed you in the process. I get to eliminate that for right now and get us down the road. In 10 days, we're going. We're ready to build stuff based on a reasonable facsimile of the persona.
And I think that is so important to understand also for the listeners, that if you want to build a new website or design something for a client, you can't get started because you already have like a very clear direction you want to go to with this new process. Whereas in the old world, you would need to wait for a long time before your team can even get started with like basic website design. So now you hash out the direction, the team gets started, the website, and then as you get more information, you can still refine, but you are so much faster because you have a direction that you have you can go after.
Yeah, 100%. So this is the final output. The thing got presented to the client. And you can see him. She did make adjustments, and she removed. There was a mention of, I think, Cape Town up here, and she adjusted these things. You can see she added a whole bunch of channels, so it's applying her mind to bringing that up a little bit further. As she mentioned, she reduced some of the motivations and frustrations. It looks cleaner than what I had done. It's just because I'm out of practice. She reduced, so she's got the different personality type. She streamlined the touch points a bit. And I don't think she had to adjust the customer journey questions much at all. And then she added a section around brands and influencers. Nice. So that, my friend, is our process.
And it's pretty impressive and amazing. I mean, you're now saving so much time by getting the whole process jump-started. You don't have to wait for people to come back to give you the information that you need, customers, and you can get started with the actual work. I mean, you don't do this for fun, but you do this so you can build a better website that converts better because it speaks to the buyer persona. And you can get started right away, basically after like a week or two with this process. And
it's all controlled. It's in our domain. We can control that stuff instead of leaving it out to that third party. And once we go out there, it's who knows. It's just
so fast,
agonizing. So thanks, ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Thanks, OpenAI.
That's amazing. It's still mind blowing. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything in such detail. I think it's illuminating in many ways about what you can do with ChatGPT, what you can do with a good buyer persona profile or whatever you want to call it, but with a clear idea of who you're actually trying to sell to, and also the importance of the journey map, which I think is also a document that not enough marketers are paying attention to. And that, it's super insightful. So, JohnScott, thank you for your time. How can listeners reach you if they want to hire your company, Aiden Taylor, to do this work for them? How can they find you?
So it's Aiden Taylor Marketing. You probably saw it up there a little bit, but AIDAN, no E, Taylor Marketing. And so you can go to aidentaylor.com and find us and make an appointment. We're happy to talk and guide you through the process. We love doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, JohnScott.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's fun, son.
Thank you.